Hi, everyone from rainy Bloomington, Indiana. My name is Tatiana Kolovou. This is the live version or office hours of Stronger, my newsletter. Going live and doing a session like this is pretty stressful. All day long, I've been hoping that our cat, Kukla, who you see over here, would stay sleeping in the downstairs room, but no, she's not going to do that. So she's going to push my anxiety level a little bit as we can join together here in this session. So I already see some of your comments and where you're coming in from. I love to hear where your location is, and you can tell us even what's happening in your part of the world. I just posted a LinkedIn newsletter talking about resilient strategies for tough times. And just today, we all woke up in the United States to very hard news of what's happening to our friends in Ukraine and in Europe with very distressing news. And it's a good reminder how things around us change on a regular basis and become very, very difficult sometimes for us to deal with. So today, I wanted to comment on a few things that I used in my newsletter and also bring in a guest that we have that can join us and share with us some of the parallels. This is what I wrote in this newsletter, some of the parallels between what athletes do to overcome anxiety, stress, and dealing with difficult situations and where we can learn from that. Edmonton, North Carolina, Carrie, fantastic. Admiring my work from Bloomington, Indiana. Mary Bell, we have to connect if you're here. Thank you. The cat is beautiful, but quite naughty. Paris, thanks for coming in. And of course, Brazil. I know I told you this morning I'm on a team that's quite international, team of trainers, and we have definitely been talking a lot of what's happening in Europe today. So the Olympics ended a week or so ago, and we saw so many athletes dealing with distress in the moment. And we know that the performances that they put together don't just come in by chance. They do a lot of training and they overcome a lot of adversity. One of the things that I thought would be helpful is to draw from some of these parallels. You're still logging in. I love it. And talk about the art of or the skill of visualization. So if it's difficult to deal with a situation right now, my advice in the newsletter and in the LinkedIn learning course, by the way, 5,000 learners in 1 month since we published the Resilient Strategies for Optimal Performance. I think we're going to put it in the feed in a free link that I created so you can check it out. So as we see the Olympic performances happening, we actually see many athletes do visualization. And visualization is not something that's just specific in the world of athletics. If you want something to go well, you can mentally prepare for it. You can see yourself doing something, or you can actually be in the feeling. If I'm stressed out about doing a live, I can go through the checklist and make sure that everything is aligned, but I can also see myself doing a good performance and the cat not being distracting here as we go. I see here, yes, I already am getting some questions. I just wanted to review some of the things that I had discussed. So visualization, and we'll hear from a sports psychologist in just a little bit on how it's very helpful in getting us to mentally prepare. But when we are going through difficult times, to always visualize the positive, to overcome what we're happening and seeing what would the positive, good end result be, just like athletes see themselves on the podium and see themselves winning. The next thing that I talk a little bit about is affirmation. So strategies that are affirmative when you are going through a difficult, rough patch, maybe just journaling about what is your strength, what you're good at, what you are connected to, and you know how to do well. Because we all tend as humans, when we go through a difficult time, everything looks gloomy and it's very hard maybe to find the positive. I tend to try and surround myself with people that are positives, my advisory board, and ask them for help and affirmation, or I may do that myself. In the next few days, I'll be doing a workshop for managers, and as a way of overcoming adversity and difficult rough patches, being able to give praise and affirming people for their work. If you work with others, or if you have children at home or teenagers at home, give them positive praise during tough times, because we all feel the negative effect of some of that adversity. So in this newsletter, then I say jive to it. Just use music to help you bring your energy up, or to help you focus, or to help you pace yourself. It's amazing what the power of music can do. And at the end of our time here together, I'm going to share an actual playlist that I put together. Someone wants... Okay, very specific. Christopher's asking for resilience recommendation from me to Caterpillar. I'd need to know a little bit more to respond to that, Christopher, if you don't mind sharing a little more. And I'm moving up this and looking for any specific questions in the feed. And when we got together here, someone talked about tips for getting past the anxiety that stops us from resilience practices. My friend, Dr. Johnson Tamleet, thank you very much for sharing this. I've been reading a book which came out several years ago called Atomic Habits, and it talks about the habits that sets us up for success that may not be big, hairy, audacious, life-changing habits, but small little steps that get you there. So if you see some of these resilience strategies as being very big and difficult to implement, my recommendation to you, Tamleet, would be to take little steps, just small things that you can do every day to feel and overcome. For example, I talk about music being very helpful. See if that helps you when you wake up to hear a song that's uplifting for you. By the way, I'd love it if you share with me, oh, there you are. Share with me some of your go-to songs, and I'll put them on the playlist as we go. Some of these, if it's too anxiety-provoking to share some of the affirmation, positive things, I would say ask your friends to remind you what is it that brings light to the room when you walk in, and that's very helpful. Coursera's resilience courses have changed my life. I highly recommend. Anita, take my courses too on LinkedIn Learning. It's a very hot topic, I would say. I would agree, and I could see how this also exists in other platforms as well. The part that I wanted to spend a little time with as well was also talking about mini respites. Quite often, if pressure from what's happening that's causing adversity is around you and you can't walk away from it completely, taking short breaks is very, very helpful to you. And we'll discuss this with our expert that's going to come in just a bit. Someone says, I recommend going to the gym. Absolutely. Not just going to the gym. The outdoor gym is also available if you live in a place that sees a little bit of sun or just the fresh air as you can get it. Ευτυχία να είσαι καλά. We have some friends from Greece joining us too, going to the gym and connecting here. So drop in some of your favorite tunes. Remember, I'm going to put those in there. We talk about mini respites, not just going on a tropical vacation, maybe walking away from your door in the morning and walking back, making it 5 minutes out, 5 minutes back, just breathing some fresh air, not taking your phone, trying to unplug. And hopefully that's something that will release or take your mind away from it too. I'm not going to say specifically a yoga class or a swimming class or going out on a run, because we all have different ways that are helpful to us. The doctor gave me that advice for my baby had colic, take a break. That's right. A colicky baby can cause disarray in a household. In general, babies can cause disarray in a household, and new ones especially. So I couldn't agree with you more there, Brianna. So as we get going and talking about some of this, I thought it would be appropriate, since I see the analogy so much with sport and performance, to bring in an expert that studies this on a regular basis. My expert that you will meet in just a little bit is Dr. Jack Raglin. He is a physiology psychologist. He is an exercise physiology psychologist, a sports psychologist, who does a very in-depth research on what happens to athletes maybe when they overtrain, what happens to their mental state, their physical state, what is the optimal training range for coaches to help athletes with, and how exercise and mental health are connected. So many of you mentioned exercise, and that is very true here. So, Tatiana, can you share some techniques from stepping out of the comfort zone and how resilience can help? So, before bringing Jack in, Mary Bell, I'll say that this and a lot of what we talk about, that being comfortable with discomfort will make you more resilient. But I'm a little cautious to say that because we are still in a time of pressure cooker time, and the last thing I want you all to do is putting yourself in uncomfortable situations as you are. I'd be happy to share, and I'll follow up with you and share a couple of former past newsletters that I've shared that I can send to you. So check out some of the stronger newsletter. So from Bloomington, Indiana, as we get started, Dr. Jack Raglin is joining us from his office. He just finished teaching the sports psychology class in undergraduate. How many students did you have, Jack?
Well, if they all showed up, it'd be about 170, but
170.
they weren't all there today.
So it's more of a show, but he is well known for telling incredible stories that all come from sport and coaches and athletes from the past and from current events and things that happen. Now, Jack is joining us from his office, but if you happen to catch him in his everyday life, he'd be in this setting as well, because Jack and I are married. He's my husband, and I'll disclose this right now. We've been married for 28 years and going strong. And I asked him, we have these conversations, the dinner table conversations are quite exciting for us. And we talk a lot about how high-performing athletes are like people in the workplace that have the same stressors, the same anxiety, the same performance requirements. And in most cases, Jack, they don't get to win. Is that right?
That's right. They have to, in certain sports, you never win all the time, or even in the majority of the time.
Right. So the last thing I talked about was about taking short respites. And we talk about the analogy of recovery in sports. If you work really hard, obviously, if you go and run really hard, you need a little bit of a break if you're going to go and do it again the next day, or if you're going to do it within a workout. The same thing for the work world. We can't keep going strong all the time. What do you see from physiological effects that could happen, and what are the analogies that you think would be helpful for us?
Well, you bring up a good point, because, recovery for athletes involves the recovery of your body and physical systems to be able to do the work over and over again. And there are very hard and set rules about how much your body has to rest between moderate and hard bouts. We know that. But what we also know is that psychologically, you need to recover. And in that case, people have very different levels. There are certain athletes that don't require that much recovery from a psychological standpoint. They can bounce back. There are others who take a lot longer, need more types of recovery. It's not just a matter of just sitting and allowing yourself to physically respond.
Mm-hmm.
And they're more at risk of breaking down when they work very hard. We call that overtraining syndrome.
So is age a component, that if someone has been doing it for a long time? I'm thinking of someone in the work world that has been working for 25 years and someone then just entered. Is it a matter of how much do we have in the tank, or is it just a matter of what our personality and disposition is?
Well, age, I think, can work for you, because if you've been, for instance, an athlete for a long period of time, you know your body very well. You wouldn't still be an athlete. You also know your psychology very well in terms of what type of recovery and when. And a lot of older athletes are very, very careful and detailed self-regulators, not only in terms of the work that they're doing, but also their nutrition, their recovery, sleep. So they're really trying to manage all aspects of their life. Whereas young athletes don't have that sort of experience, either as being athletes or with their bodies. And so I think in a lot of cases, they need guidance, they need ideas, they need examples that they can try and see how they work and come up with their own sort of plan and strategy. So it doesn't just come to them. Sometimes they need the guidance definitely of a coach or someone who can supply them with ways to recover and how hard and how long they should train.
So you think this analogy that I draw all the time of our workplace warriors, the corporate athletes in the workplace grinding it out every day, isn't it pretty similar to what athletes we see do in the Olympics, train and practice and have goals and try and have adversity that happens? Can't we draw from a lot of these same strategies?
Yeah, I think we can. And there are certain conditions and situations that are very parallel. I mentioned overtraining syndrome, which is the consequence of too much work with too little recovery. And we used to just think about it as being too much work, but more and more as we do research, we know that the recovery is very important. It's not simply the absence of work or rest. It's adding active forms of recovery, looking at helping different systems recover, both physically, nutritionally, psychologically, you could even say spiritually, and integrating those in a very purposeful manner. So it's not an organic sort of thing. It's something that you have to sort of structure, plan, and think hard about.
Yeah. It's not just, as you said, sitting on the couch and doing nothing. That may not be as fulfilling, and you may still feel tired when you're done with that. It's doing something that's enjoyable or does not create a lot of the intensity. Brianna has a really good point. She says, we've seen this in the news lately, athletes who share out loud that they need a break. And this is also on the LinkedIn platform. We have some really candid conversations about people saying, I'm done. I don't want to use the word burnout because I do think, and I know from the research that is out there, that burnout means if you're burned out in your job, you're done, you're fried, you go and do something completely different. Just like athletes that are burned out will never come back to the sport. It's burnout that we're trying to avoid, right?
Right. And so using the example of overtraining, when athletes sometimes reach the point of burnout from becoming overtrained repeatedly, they're kind of done with their sport. In the case of overtraining, we see athletes who are still engaged and motivated. And that's part of the problem because they just want to jump back into their training to try to regain what they seem to have lost. And that's not the right thing to do. They have to, as your viewer just said, step back. And it can be very difficult and kind of scary for them to say, oh, I'm going to take a week or two off or however much time because they feel like they're going to fall behind. They're going to lose what they've achieved and worked so hard for. So sometimes doing what's right is challenging and even paradoxical. You mentioned, rest is not just sitting around. And for athletes who have developed overtraining syndrome, they need what we call active rest, where they're actually doing recreational exercise or some form of activity. It's like the person who's at the end of the day, they feel like they're so tired, they just want to sit down and lay down. They don't want to exercise. But if you exercise correctly, it can actually alleviate fatigue and re-energize you, even though you think it's just going to make you more tired.
I want to go back to what you said about athletes having coaches that help them modulate and moderate. The difference there is that's the job. When someone is in the workplace and the load keeps getting piled on, if managers are not cognizant of this, and the managers that I have been talking to are the ones that I say, look, if you want to prevent burnout, make sure you allow for short breaks or have an afternoon where there's no meetings or have one day a week where everyone does not send each other emails. If managers also demonstrate that and can be openly themselves taking time off, blocking off their calendar and being role models, that's helpful because athletes it's unfair for us to compare them, but I do think people in the workplace have a much harder time.
Well, I think some managers it's like coaches. There are coaches who are aware of this, who actively integrate this information in their research to try to help athletes. There are coaches and managers who aren't educated and aware of it. And unfortunately, there are bad coaches and bad managers who have the strategy of pushing everybody to their limits or past it to see who can make it and who can't. And, In those cases, sometimes you lose your best employees and your best athletes because they're the ones with the greatest capacity or
Yeah,
potential, but you have to nurture it and allow them to recover for them to grow.
absolutely. We talked a little bit about the ability to be attuned to your body. I think this is one very important skill that we all need as we experience different levels of pressure, maybe from difficult situations in life or just workload in general. I like what you talk about being really connected, being really associated with our bodies, just like athletes when they're running an important race. They can tell you their heart rate, they can tell you their breathing rate and what their pace is time wise. Can we learn a little bit from that? And is it important to be that self-aware in order to endure?
Well, in sport, it's absolutely critical. And, you bring up this example, which right now is one of the hottest areas of research in sport performance,
Mhm.
because so much goes into pacing. And
Mhm.
athletes make these moment to moment decisions about harder, faster, slower, and so on, based on not only the feedback that they're getting from their bodies, but also the surrounding environment and what other people are doing around them. And I think that's a good corollary to the workplace, where it's not only your own workload and where you stand, but what's happening in the environment around you and the
Sure.
demands and what other people are doing. And that affects the sorts of decisions that you make. But we do know that good athletes, are very attuned to what's going on inside their bodies. They very deliberately pay attention to this information, even though it's stressful and not easy to do. And they make decisions based upon that. Whereas
Mhm.
the situation with, let's say, a recreational athlete in the same race can be very, very different. And the strategy
Mm.
that they use is different too.
Mhm. So you're saying that if we know that there's a lot of pressure on us, we need to be intentional about building in downtime, about shutting down the phones, the computers, about waking up and doing maybe whatever exercise we enjoy or whatever movement will be different than the hours and hours of sitting, because we tend to not be as attuned and could overtrain, as
Mhm.
the term is used for athletes, correct?
Well, yes, and even in a race, we know that in comparison to competitive athletes, a lot of non-competitive athletes, say, first-time marathoners, do exactly the opposite. They what we call dissociate, where they try to disconnect their awareness from what's happening within because it's so overwhelming, it's so painful, and so the way they complete the race or endure is just to ignore, and that can help them get through a race, but it's not going to ever result in a good performance. And what
Mhm.
often happens in these cases is they become injured or overexert themselves, and they either hurt themselves or fail because of that. So
Mhm.
there is this short-term benefit from ignoring what's going on. But in the long term, or if your goal is to try to optimize your performance or protect yourself, you really do have to kind of tune in. And
Associate. Mhm.
and this is sort of a form of resilience, because the more you do that, one, the more you understand what's going on, but you also start to learn about your capacity. It's like,
Mhm.
that was awful, but I got through it
Yeah.
and I feel okay. Or that was awful and I'm glad I backed off, because if I
Yeah.
ignore that, I could have gotten in real trouble.
In my first course, I talk about threshold, having a resilience threshold, and if you operate right under it, it's safe. But if you want to get stronger, you come up with situations that kind of push you, as you said, and you survive them, of course, within safe situations. But in order to be more resilient, back to what you said about athletes really tuning in and associating, we talk about the power of music to energize us or pace us or help us relax and focus. But you never saw any of those incredible Olympian cross country skiers or duathletes or skaters, speed skaters with music in their ears in a race. They're focusing very intently. But you see so many people recreationally running a half marathon or a marathon completely plugged in. Or when you go to the gym, I know it drives you crazy, but they dissociate in this way. But maybe those are times, or we need to decide what are the times where we use music as a as a performance enhancer, and when is it best to just leave it out because we really have to zone in?
So even with elite athletes, when they're training, they very often dissociate. I don't know if they use music or not. In other words, they know what they have to do. They have their assignment. They know what it's going to feel like and what the requirements are. So it's like, okay, I can zone out and just get through this because I know when the finish line is or what I have to do. So in those sorts of situations where it is controlled, it's like, yeah, that can work and that can help you get through that sort of drudgery and you know when it's going to end. So music, I think under those, let's say, controlled or predictable circumstances can make the task at hand much, much better.
Sure.
And certainly a lot more entertaining for you. And so that's true for elite athletes too, but they do have this ability to switch in when they know they have to pay attention, when it really matters. And they do that where the recreational athletes often
we're not supposed to multitask when it's really important and when it matters. And that's what you're saying too. And that's multitasking. Brianna says, is it okay to dissociate in the moment for self-preservation?
That's a really good comment because there are examples of really good athletes who pay attention, and then they get to this terrible pain zone. Let's say, a really tough part of the race, and they selectively dissociate. They'll use sort of a strategy to take them into like thinking about something else to get through that hill or through that hard push. And then they come out of it and go back into it. So absolutely, there is this idea of strategic dissociation when it's like, oh my gosh, that's coming up and I know what I have to do. And I'm just going to zone out until it's over. And then I'm going to get back into the thick of things. So yes, Brianna, there are lots of examples of elite athletes that do exactly what you're suggesting.
Maribel's comment now applies. She talks about, can you share some techniques for stepping out of your comfort zone and how resilience can help? Or by stepping out of your comfort zone is when you are becoming a little thicker skinned. You're pushing your threshold. In my course, my first course, I talk about asking for things you cannot get. You know that when you walk up to a counter and you say, are there any spots available in business class? You have no business asking for that. And they're going to say no, but asking for something you can't get, and sometimes you do, or trying to accomplish something that you're not supposed to accomplish, or pushing a little further beyond, asking for a project that's what we call in the world of work a stretch assignment, something that maybe will give you more visibility, that's a little bit outside of your scope of expertise. Those are the types of things that will help you stay in that discomfort zone a little more. The analogies come straight out of course, exercise. I teach indoor cycling classes. There are lots of opportunities to push your threshold literally and mentally, but that's what at the end of the day makes you stronger as you try to deal with other adversity.
So I like that example because it's like these are instrumental examples. In other words, there are ways of stretching yourself that when you get that extra resilience, you're actually going to try that or something like that. So in other words, it has this sort of direct application and meaning. And it's the same thing in sport where we try to, when people are dealing with the overwhelming anxiety of an Olympic event, you try to create stressful situations that are as close as you can analogous to that. So it's like, you're not just being anxious, you're being anxious because the stakes are higher, or that there are more people watching you, or that expectations are higher. And so that when it really happens, it's like, oh, I've sort of tasted that type of stress before, and it's not new or novel, and I have some experience in dealing with it.
I got this. One of our learners here said how I get anxious overcoming, I can't even do the resilience practices because I get anxious. And my response is, a little anxiety is not a bad thing. In fact, you've done all the research on optimal zone function, where you have athletes that are literally sick to their stomach before Olympic level performances, or CEOs that go into a boardroom and kill it with a presentation, but they feel awful right before they have to do it. They're not calm.
The variability and what level of anxiety works is really incredible. I think one thing to keep in mind is usually the anxiety is overwhelming before you start doing the sport or engaging in things. And once you start getting past that start line, so to speak, often you feel like, oh, it's starting to get under control because I'm doing something rather than
Yeah.
waiting and waiting. So it's that apprehension that I think
Mhm.
your viewer is talking about. It's like, I can't even think about doing that because I'm
Yeah.
overwhelmed. But once you start to do it, it's like, uh, you know, because you're doing something, you're moving, you're practicing, that
Yeah.
anxiety sort of gets channeled into something meaningful.
You
Or
know, the students that I teach I mean, speaking is ranked second of the biggest fears under death. What are you afraid the most? Death, and then public speaking. And I try so much to get them in front of the room, to get them practicing, to come up with all sorts of fun, silly improv games where they do. And at times I even say, right before it's your time to speak, when the previous speaker, go out in the hallway and walk, because the last
oh
thing
yes,
you want to do is just sit at your chair at your desk waiting for your time. Panos Vatsis is joining us from Greece, or probably no, from the US. It's so great to see some friends on this feed. Does anyone else have any questions that you would want to put in the feed regarding the parallels between performance in sport and performance at work, and what can we do to up our game and to be able to take care of ourselves?
so while they're doing that, I'll share a story that I saw at the Olympics. Everyone probably knows the athlete Elaine Gu, the Chinese American,
Mm-hmm.
who was, I think she won 3 medals. And, you know, a lot of the athletes were overwhelmed by anxiety, especially at this Olympics. But she had done her first out of 3 runs, and the half pipe was rather poor, and she was expected to win. And she said, I study my psychology. It's very important to me. And her mother gave her some advice. Now, you'd think her mother would say, you know,
Yeah.
relax, take it easy, and do well. Her mother said, no, you know what? The second run's coming up, and you have to think of that second run as if it was your last chance. In other words, you don't have a third run. This is it. And you can imagine if you do that, it's like, oh my gosh, her anxiety started to go up, and the apprehension, because it's this or nothing. So to me, it was insightful for 2 reasons. Her mom knew it worked. And secondly, this is a case where it's like, you know, no, you think the mom would try to settle her down, but she really threw the pressure at her. And Elaine said, that's exactly what I needed.
Yeah.
This is a case where exactly the opposite of what you think would work really
Well,
helped her.
and sometimes someone in the feed earlier said we need to be empathetic, and it's true. Her mom knew her. Someone from the outside that walked in would say she's being so pushy,
Mhm.
she's risking her, but she knows her well enough to know this is it, or she was able to do that. I'm going to show Shelby's question says, how can we put ourselves in anxiety inducing situations in day-to-day life? First of all, my question is, why would you? But part of it is wanting to keep yourself in the running. I'm guessing that's what Shelby is asking. Do you have any thoughts, Jack?
Well, with athletes, you know, what we try to do is duplicate the competitive situation. So
Mm,
if we study anxiety with athletes, laboratory studies are often useless because the environment is so artificial and removed from, you know, where they really need to perform. And I guess you could say it would be the same thing with the workplace, where if you want to kind of test yourself, you have to be in the real environment and
yeah.
put yourself in situations, you know, maybe making these sort of asks that you were talking about, or
Or doing speaking.
interacting with an employee that you have had bad experiences with,
Mm,
um, in the real environment where you know you're testing yourself where it matters,
yeah.
because you could create those skills outside the environment and they may not transfer into it.
Oh, Shelby, next month in my newsletter, in next month's Stronger Live, I'll talk about impromptu speaking. And I have found many artificial intelligence AI tools where you can go and practice. And in some of them, again, speaking is very anxiety provoking. And you practice while they throw random words at you that you have to incorporate. I can tell you that my students that have practiced some of these, I see an incredible difference because they've trained at a more intense level. That's not what they have to do when they do their speeches, and that helps them specifically. Panos has a really good question, Jack, and I love it that he's joining us and asking this because it's so relevant to what you're saying. How do athletes rebound after failure? You study this, and what can we learn from that level of resilience?
Well, I think one thing they do, and you know, there are famous quotes over about this is that they view failure as an inherent aspect in success and training. That is, there are certain sports where you fail more than you succeed, and all athletes of any degree of success have gone through very, very difficult failures. And so, what they, I think, often do is they realize that this is part of a long-term process, which is inescapable and a requirement if you're going to achieve at a high level. So they realize it's part of the journey. The other thing I think they do is they try to break that failure down. In other words, how do I avoid this or keep this from happening again? So in the case of an athlete in a race, where did my strategy go wrong? And how can I avoid that? And the next time that happens, what am I going to do? So they turn it into a learning experience. They realize it's a part of their training that makes them stronger ultimately. Mm-hmm. And they also, I think, realize that they don't try to develop a failure mindset where they're afraid of failure. They want to avoid it, so they may not try so hard. They know that, yep, I have to put myself out there again. So those are some of the suggestions I would make.
So many parallels. We call it after action review in the business world, or after certain races, athletes have to turn in race reports to their coaches. We'll take one more question before we take off. Swati says, is adversity necessary for building resilience?
In the case of sport, there's a lot of research that supports it, that you look at successful athletes and they've gone back, they've even identified adverse situations of adversity, not just within the sport, but outside the sport. So I think that's an important thing to realize, is that, if you've gone through adversity and succeeded, even if it's not related to your workplace, that process can generalize and help you in the workplace. And we found that with athletes too. So the answer is yes, but of course, their overwhelming adverse incidents can have negative effects. So, as best you can, if you know that you need this, you want to provide yourself with the right type of dose, so to speak. It's the same case with athletes. You can only progress in training at certain rates before you start to break down. And it takes some time to, understand where that process is and how much you can handle. But ultimately, it will help.
I clicked on Norhoda's question. How do you see it how can you keep from seeing it as a failure and not just a challenge?
Well, she says they don't see it as a failure, but a challenge.
Not a challenge. Yes, absolutely. And part of that is also how you speak to yourself about it. I even just said, are you overextended or are you burned out? We use the word burnout so easily in the work world. And I think we need to be mindful of doing that, because that's a pretty serious situation. It's an all and done. And we've got to be mindful and thoughtful about how we use our language and calling it a challenge and what we learn from that too.
Well, I think the good thing about that is if you test yourself and you know that there's a great likelihood of failing, then you do see it as a challenge. It's like I'm deliberately putting myself in this situation where I'm probably not going to succeed, and I'm imposing this sort of challenging circumstance on me because I feel like I can grow and learn from it.
But I've tried anyway.
You couldn't, predict in the first place.
Talking about this, this is my monthly challenge: doing a live and managing the questions, the comments, the guests, the cat, and all this. It's a challenge. I rise to that challenge, and maybe we feel more alive a little bit if we put ourselves in those situations, or we just say, you know what, this month there's too many things going on. I'm going to self-preserve and not do that. And that's part of that being self-aware. Any closing comments, Jack?
None, except I enjoyed this a lot more than I thought they would.
There you go.
I thought you were going to grill me. I was
way to push your resilience threshold.
Fear of failure. So I feel like I can do it again.
We have such a nice group of friends joining
great
us.
Questions. They were great questions.
Absolutely.
Insightful comments. I wish I had students like that.
Yeah.
They just sit there.
They just sleep there, is what you're saying. Thank you so much for joining us. A warm goodbye to Dr. Raglin. And thank you so much for joining us in the Stronger Live that we had today. As a present, we're going to share with you a playlist from Spotify with some fun, upbeat music. For my Greek friends, I always have a little bit of Greek music there that helps me and motivates me and wakes me up and helps me move and sing along to and all of that good stuff. So thank you so much. Take care of yourself. Stay safe, stay self-aware, and praise all the people around you. Thank you for coming here today. Bye-bye.